Hello, everyone, and welcome back to the Aquarium of the Pacific's online academy. My name is Dana. I'm a member of the education department here, and we're so excited that you're joining us for our last program of the day. Today, we are going to be talking about kelp forests and their conservation. So, we're going to be exploring a kelp forest, talking about kelp as an algae, and then talking about a kelp forest as a habitat and what that might mean. And then, of course, looking at the threats and what we've done to help protect kelp forest habitats. Now, I am joined in the studio still by James and by Luke, both of who are going to be helping me. James will be controlling what's going on back here, and Luke will be taking your questions. If you want to join us during our program, go ahead and text this phone number right down here at 562 286 1838. Now, keep in mind that texting rates do apply, and please make sure that you have adult permission to text in today. Now, we have received a couple phone calls at this phone number. Keep in mind that it is texting only, okay? If you are watching after our live stream, you're also welcome to participate and join us still. We do have a email address that we're monitoring when we're not live streaming, and that email will be live@lbaop.org. Once again, that's live@lbaop.org. That's Long Beach Aquarium of Pacific. All right, friends, so with that in mind, we're going to get started here. We're going to be chatting about one of my favorite habitats. It's actually found right here in Southern California, and that's going to be this beautiful habitat that's going to show up behind me. All right, so what is this? What are we looking at here exactly? Well, I see some stuff growing. It looks like it's underwater, right? So you can see the light shining through from above. It also looks really rich, really thick, right? It's not like an open ocean. And so kelp forests like this right here are a local habitat. Like I said, they're found right here in Southern California and all up along our coastline. And we're going to take a look at a couple other footage of a couple other videos of kelp forest habitat. So I'm going to step off and we're going to scroll through some of those. So this one right here is from our Blue Cavern exhibit. Our Honda Blue Cavern exhibit is our tallest window here at the aquarium. It's 188,000 gallons, I think. Nope. 142,000 gallons. I was so close. This next showing right here, this is our Amber Forest exhibit. This is right next to Blue Cavern, but it shows a couple different things. So Blue Cavern was a little bit deeper, a little bit less kind of, I don't want to call them filler fish. I'll explain that here in a minute. But Blue Cavern has some larger animals, where this exhibit right here, Amber Forest, has a lot smaller ones, and there's quite a few more in here, not counting that sardine school from Blue Cavern. And so as you can see here, there's a lot of fish hanging out in the mid-water. And again, I'll talk about what that is here as we roll into the habitat aspect of kelp. But once again, we do still have this kelp frond right here, okay? And so we're going to take a look at a special camera of mine. We're going to explore the different parts of kelp as an organism. So I'll join you over there in a second. Get me off the screen. All right, so I got what I needed over here. We've got this right up here. Hopefully you guys can see. There we go. We're really, really zoomed in. All right, there we go. Much better. Okay, so the parts of kelp. Let's think about what that is. Kelp is not a plant. It's actually a type of algae. Now, it is a brown algae, to be more specific. Algae is typically found in red, greens, or browns. Those are the common groupings. And kelp is a brown algae. Now, it's not a plant, but it looks quite a bit like it. However, plants have a root system that go down into the dirt, into the ground. Giant kelp, instead, I'm going to move this up a bit, has something called a holdfast. Okay, and that's going to be what appears to us like a series of roots, but it's not actually embedded in the ground. Instead, it's helping attach that frond, which we'll get to a hard substrate. So be that either a rock or maybe a rocky ground. So this is our holdfast right here. Let's see, holdfast. All right, now the next part about kelp is going to be this long part right over here. And that is going to be kind of the main structure that supports the kelp as it grows up. And this is called, let's see how I'm going to do this. This is called the stipe, okay? Kind of going up along the edge here. This is the stipe. Now, that's great and all, but how does kelp grow from the bottom of the seafloor all the way up to the surface? Along the stipe are a series of gas-filled bladders. We call them nematocysts, okay? And they are along the stipe helping to raise that long organism up to the surface. Now, kelp like this, giant kelp, is actually one of the fastest growing organisms. It can grow up to 2 feet per day under really pristine conditions. And it takes it from the seafloor all the way up to the top. And that's because algae like this need sunlight. And it does a lot of its photosynthesizing in this part of the organism right here. This is called the blade. Okay, so this is a kelp blade. And that's going to be found all up and down the stipe coming off of those gas-filled sacs. So let's see. Didn't know you were joining in for a Draw With Me program, did you? Now notice that they're not all perfect. They're not all the same. See if I can zoom out a little bit more. Nope, looks like I'm all the way zoomed out. But as I work my way up to the top, they actually get a little bit smaller as we go. Okay. And so again, it's going to reach all the way up to the surface. All right. So again, down at the bottom, we have the holdfast. Then we have the stipe. We have the blade. And this entire kelp organism is known as a kelp frond. Okay. So that's an individual animal. What does kelp need, or sorry, not animal, organism, algae. What does kelp need to become this? All right, let's go ahead and get that screen back on behind me with the swaying kelp. There we go, beautiful, just like this. So you can see we've got a holdfast. Let's see if we have one in shot. Doesn't look like it, but they would be down here, right? Then we've got the stipe. That's what's going to be holding this up. There's going to be air sacs that are hard to see in here. And oh, let's see if we can get that in there, if we can get that other video. There we go. So holdfast is going to be down here, okay? Then as it goes up, that's the stipe. You can see all the blades, and actually floating right over there, that's where we're going to find little mini air sacs, all right? And then the larger ones, you can actually see right in there, those kind of ball-like things. Ooh, there's a bunch right there. All right, so those are the air sacs of the nematocysts of that kelp frond. Here they are again represented in our Honda Blue Cavern exhibit. Now, what else does kelp as an organism need, right? What does the algae need? So I mentioned that it needed the sunlight to photosynthesize. It does also take in some nutrients just through absorption from the ocean. And that's why it's very important that the ocean that giant kelp is growing in is very nutrient rich, which is why kelp forest habitats like we have off of our coastline here are only found in about 5 places around our globe. Now, it looks like we're getting some questions coming in, which we love. So if you're joining us live or if you're watching after the fact, live, feel free to text us. After the fact, go ahead and shoot us an email. We'd love to be able to answer your questions to the best of our ability. It looks like Benjamin is, welcome back, Benjamin. How many species of kelp are there? Oh, that's such a great question. So there are like 112 species, and they're kind of grouped into 33 categories, okay? And according to a 2010 study, just counting true kelp. So when I say 112, there might be some outliers that aren't really grouped. Sometimes when it comes down to how many species there are of certain groups of animals, it really comes down to when you're asking, right? We're learning more and more every year, every day, every hour even sometimes. And then it also comes down to what scientists you are asking. Sometimes they agree about this characteristic or this characteristic, but they can be categorized a little bit differently. So we're going to say about 112. All right. Great question, Benjamin. Now, back to the kelp right here. So we mentioned that it needs the sunlight. It needs the nutrients in the water. It also needs really cool temperatures, okay? So kelp forests live in, well, here off California, we have what's called temperate waters, meaning it can fluctuate quite a bit. However, as you go north along the coast, it is going to get cooler and cooler. And you'll also find that our kelp forests tend to be a little bit richer as we go north. And that's because here in Southern California, we get some really weird anomalies, right? California in general can deal with it, but Southern California gets hit pretty hard just because we are towards the kind of southern range of, or southern edge of that range. And so when we get El Nino, right, that's when the winds shift and the currents change and warm water comes to our coastline. And then we also get the blob. I don't know if you've heard about the blob, but it was a water pocket, a little bit of a weird incidence of warm water sitting off of our coast. And kelp likes to live in a very specific range. In fact, they thrive at about 65 degrees, okay, maybe 62. And so when it gets really, really warm, we start to see our kelp forests kind of dwindle and kind of get really thin and almost look like they're just wasting away or getting really worn out, right? They have to deal with storms. They just might not be as strong. So again, we're looking for that sunlight. We're looking for that nutrient-rich water, and we're looking for cold water, okay? And that's what makes our California coast so perfect for it. Now, we've talked a lot about what it needs to grow and all of that, but let's talk about it as far as what its uses are for. Why is kelp important? Now, for one thing, kelp as an organism can be harvested, either naturally or it can also be farmed. There are kelp farms, and that's because, ooh, big fish swimming by. That's because kelp can be used in a lot of different products. Now, it's very special because kelp creates something called algin, and it's an emulsifier or a thickening agent. And what that means is it's used in products to bind things together. It's used in ice cream. It's used in toothpaste. It's used in makeup. It's used in all sorts of products that we use every single day. Hopefully we're using toothpaste every day, right? And so it's really important that we have access to this wonderful organism as a product or something that we can harvest. And like I said, it is farmed now. But that's not all we use kelp for. And we're also not the only ones who use kelp, all right? So first of all, we use kelp for other things. Take a big breath with me. 1, 2, 3. Perfect. Now, believe it or not, we tend to give the trees and the plants on land a lot of credit, but the majority of the oxygen that we breathe in every single day comes from algae in the ocean, just like giant kelp. Not just giant kelp, but algae like giant kelp. And so without algae like this, we would really be struggling as a species, and so would all of the other animals on Earth. Now, we talked about how we use it, but look at what else we see in this video behind me. I'm going to step off one more time and check out what's going on here. So what do you see? What do you notice? Is it just water with algae in it? I see an orange fish swimming by. I see a lot of blue-gray fish swimming by. I see some skinny fish. I see some pretty rotund fish. I see a long fish. So the point that I'm making is there's a lot of fish in here, right? Now, if we were to actually go back through the highlight reel of our Blue Cavern exhibit, we would even see some big fish, okay? This is where our giant sea bass hang out. And so a habitat like this not only supports all those products that I mentioned, not only provides us with oxygen, but it also supports over 800 different species of animals, all right? And so we talked about kelp as an organism, right? As a frond, as one of these growing, the nutrients it needs and all of that stuff. What we're going to do now is we're going to look at more of the collective group of kelp and talk about the kelp forest habitat, all right? So this, oh, look, there they are. So that is one of those giant sea bass that I was talking about. This can be, if you're watching, you can actually watch all of this footage whenever you feel like joining us or visiting the aquarium. You can go on our website, and we have a couple different webcams. And then, of course, right here, this says the live cam highlights. So if you kind of scroll back all the way through, you can get to our highlights, and that's where we can see, that's our sheephead right here, one of my favorite fish. We've got another giant sea bass coming up right over here, and of course, this one right here. So there's lots to explore on our website, as well as with our webcams. But this is great representation of animals that we would find in the kelp forest habitat. So, like I said, it supports over 800 different species, which is really, really incredible. Now, something that I like to talk about when we talk about a kelp forest is the collective, of course, right? It's important to support all those species, but species have to find their own personal niche. Where do they fit in? Now, that can mean ecologically, where do they fit in the food web? Where do they fit in in the natural processes that go on in the ecosystem, but it can also mean where do they fit in physically. The kelp forest is broken down into 3 main regions. Now, the first one, we can't see on this screen here, but if we were all to look up, 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 right there, we actually can see the canopy. So as you see right up here, it's kind of laying on the surface of the ocean. I mentioned that kelp can grow very, very fast. Kelp can grow from the bottom of the seafloor all the way up to the surface to reach that sunlight, and then it continues to grow. And so it grows and grows and kind of falls over onto the surface, creating this canopy that you see right here, okay? And what kind of animals live in a canopy? Well, a lot of babies actually like to hang out in the canopy right here. You can get a lot of little baby fish, little juveniles. It's kind of like a little safe nursery up there. We also get a lot of crabs, believe it or not, all the way up top there, which is kind of funny because we think of crabs as being on the floor, but I have seen a number of certain kind of crab. It's actually called a kelp crab. They like to climb up the stipe and hang out in the canopy. Birds. Wait, did you say birds? Birds! Birds will hang out in the canopy of kelp because they like to sit right on the top of it, okay? If you're ever out on a boat exploring the oceans and you see what we call a kelp patty, that's kind of a floating piece of kelp drifting by, sometimes you will find birds hanging out on it. It's like a little resting spot. So lots of animals use that upper layer right there. But what about all this? Not the canopy, but everything that's kind of in between right here, okay? This is called the mid-water column. Now, in the mid-water column, you're going to find a lot of different fish moving around, okay? You're going to see some schools of fish swimming by. One of my favorites in Monterey Bay that you'll see a lot is large, we actually call them shoals because they're not schooling, but they're kind of just hanging out together. Shoals of blue rockfish. And they just kind of drift and hover in the mid-water. And that's where you're going to get a lot of food, a lot of action going on. And so the mid-water supports a lot of different species. If you're thinking of a fish swimming through the ocean, it's usually hanging out in the mid-water column. Now we're going to jump back to, actually, can we go to amber forest real quick? We're talking about those kind of hovering fish. Perfect. So like these fish right here, these are all different species of rockfish for the most part. These fish are going to be using that mid-water column. And then if you look up top here, way over there, there's an example of what would be considered the canopy, right? It's hanging out on the surface, as well as right here. We get sharks like this one. That's a leopard shark hanging out in both mid-water and on the bottom. And as we get lower towards the bottom down here, you can see some sandy bottom right here. And, you have a surprise guest. See that fish right there? That's actually a really, really special highlight animal here at the Aquarium of the Pacific. That is Utaka. He is our baby. Well, can we call him a baby still? I don't know. It's about 3 years old. And Utaka was the first successfully raised to 3 years old giant sea bass ever in a public aquarium. So we're very proud of Utaka right there. And Utaka, as you can see, is one of those fish that likes to hang out on the sea floor. So once again, let's go back to Blue Cavern. We'll see if we get a little bit more of the bottom area around there. All right, kind of. The bottom is like right here. I think maybe if we go to what's current, we see a little bit more of that. So we'll kind of fast forward to that and we'll bring up the live stream of Blue Cavern. I think we see some more sand. But that is what we refer to, there we go, as the benthic part of a kelp forest, okay? Now, inside of our Honda Blue Cavern exhibit, it is pretty pristine, right? But if you were out in the natural habitat, it might actually be covered in a lot of different algae, okay? Ooh, looks like we're getting some more questions coming in, so I'll get to those here in just a moment. Now, the benthic part supports a lot of invertebrates. Invertebrates are animals that don't have a backbone, okay? So sea urchins and more crabs, octopus. In fact, octopus like to hang out in the spaces inside of a holdfast. Sea stars, sea slugs, snails, all sorts of invertebrate, all sorts of little sea creatures that are not swimming in the water. They're settled on the bottom. Anemones, lobsters. Oh my gosh, there's so many. I could be here all day. Like I said, 800 different species, right? So we will not be able to cover all of them in a 30-minute program. Now, down here, there's a lot of things that go on in this area as well, right? With all of those animals, my favorite part while snorkeling or while diving is to keep my eyes on what's going on down below. because that's where I can see animals compete for space, right? Well, this fish really wants to be in that hole, but so does that fish, right? Or compete for food, or look for mates. You can see some kind of mating rituals go on. So this is a really fun and really dynamic aspect of the kelp forest habitat. Now, we're going to jump to questions here, and then we're going to talk a little bit about threats and conservation of kelp forests. Laura, welcome back, Laura, was asking, has kelp been over-harvested by humans? And how does this hinder efforts to conserve the kelp forest, if so? I might actually need some help answering this one. So kelp, because it grows so fast, it's pretty hard to over-harvest it. However, other factors can lead to the depletion of kelp forests. And of course, at that point, we're going to be harvesting a little bit differently. But then we do have farms now. Is that okay? Okay, so it sounds like now we don't harvest it off of our coast in California, but there are other farms that produce algae that can also produce that algin. So again, I don't think I would say we've over harvested it though. We've just found different ways to do that. That's kind of our consensus. Any viewers out there who have or have had braces, the stuff they put in your mouth to take the mold also uses algin. So I think a lot of people know that feeling, right? Now, we did have another question come in. Is kelp edible? Is it in restaurants? Is kelp in different colors like tea? And is kelp in the Pacific Ocean? So many questions. I love it. I love the thought process there. Now, is kelp edible? Yeah, it is. Giant kelp, I don't really know if it's eaten much, but algae in the ocean in general can be. Does anybody like sushi or nori, little nori pieces? That's actually a type of algae as well. Is it in restaurants? Yeah, I just said, right? Sushi. It's also in a lot of products that are used in restaurants. Okay, so toothpaste, not typically used in restaurants, but it's actually really hard to go to a grocery store and find products that don't have any type of algae derivative in there. So again, those same products would be used in restaurants. Is kelp in different colors, like teal? Ooh, teal kelp. That would be beautiful. It does come in a range. Kelp as as the species giant kelp, they are considered a brown algae. Now, there are also red algae, there are green algae. I don't know if I've specifically seen a teal algae, though you can see in this photo right here, it's pretty green, especially as the light shines through it, though it can also be brown. It kind of just depends on the light. Apparently there is one that's considered blue algae, but it's actually a bacteria. It's not technically an algae. So it really depends how specific you want to be. Now, Benjamin again wants to know, Benjamin, you are so good at providing us with transitions. I love it. Do sea otters use kelp? And then Melody wants to know, how does sargassum grow? So both of those are actually threats in some way or involved in threats and conservation in our kelp forest. So let's transition into that subject, and I'll do my best to answer both of those as we go forward. Now, talking about sea otters, do they use kelp? Yes, yes, yes. In fact, sea otters are found in kelp forests along our coastline. More so as you move north, their range is a little bit smaller. They don't typically come down to Southern California, but sea otters live in kelp, and then they feed on this right here, okay? This is a purple sea urchin, also commonly found in kelp forests. And sea otters, purple sea urchins, and kelp provide a very simple study of what we call a trophic cascade. Okay. Now, a trophic cascade is kind of looking at one little faction of the food chain or food web. All right. And now what that means is, for the most part, urchins are going to feed on kelp and otters are going to feed on urchins. Okay. So the reason otters are so important in this is because otters are considered a keystone species for a kelp forest habitat. If we were to remove otters, these little boogers right here can destroy a kelp forest. They like to feed on the holdfast, right? They're not swimming up in the water column. They're hanging out on the ground. And they're going to be eating that holdfast, which then causes the kelp to lose its holding on that substrate. So they can cause the kelp fronds to float away. They can also eat all of the low growing kelp, right? Not even allowing it to get to the surface. And these animals right here, they can form what's called a kelp barren. And that's a huge threat. So I mentioned we would talk about threats and conservation. So one of the threats is the kelp barrens caused by sea urchins. And one of the reasons that we know this happens is because we, humans, removed the sea otters from that equation. And I said they were keystone species. What that means is if you remove them, there are drastic effects. So when we used to hunt sea otters for their thick fur, there we go, look how cute they are, right? So we would hunt them for their thick fur, and all of a sudden there were not enough sea otters in a kelp forest habitat to keep those urchins kind of at bay. It's good to have some urchins, right? But you don't want so many that it kind of destroys that habitat. And so when you remove the otters, the urchins kind of run rampant and they cause that kelp barren. And again, that was because we removed these animals from that equation. Well, how have we fixed that? We're working on it. We have put sea otters, like, no, I love them, like this animal right here, under protection, right? They're protected by the Marine Mammal Protection Act. They're protected by the Endangered Species Act, all of which basically states different ways that we're going to support them in their natural habitat. And so we've seen otter populations rebound, not to their historic numbers, but they are doing much, much better. We actually thought they had gone extinct, and then we found a population of about 50 of them or so, and they now number well over 3,000. So their numbers are returning. But once again, that was something that we did, something we learned from, and steps we have taken for the conservation of kelp forests. What other threats? Now, Melody mentioned the sargassum, and I love this. If we actually go back to Blue Cavern, we can see an example of this brighter algae right here. This is a species of sargassum algae. Sargassum is a step up in the taxonomy. Taxonomy is how we break animals into groups and how we classify them. And so the species is like the bottom of the taxonomic level. And then as you climb, sargassum encompasses a couple more species. But this is one species of sargassum that is naturally here, but there is an invasive species. Okay, so sargassum asked, how does it grow? Now, Melody asked, how does sargassum grow? So sargassum was an invasive species, meaning it was brought over and introduced to our coastline. And sargassum grows in really similar ways that kelp does, right? And so it's going to be needing the light from above. It's going to be needing nutrient-rich waters. One difference, however, is that the invasive sargassum can live in a little bit different range of temperatures. And I mentioned before that the water off of our coast is known to get very warm, sometimes too warm, and kelp can be struggling. And yet that sargassum can really thrive in a slightly warmer habitat. And so all of a sudden, sargassum starts growing everywhere because it has the nutrients, it has that slightly warmer water, and it has the light, right? Because it's starting to outcompete those kelp fronds. Now, next thing you know, you don't have a kelp barren, you have a sargassum barren, right? It's everywhere. And so that's been a huge threat. Well, how do we fix that? Oh, that is a hard one, okay? And that's going to come down to habitat management, habitat restoration. It's going to come down to all sorts of regulations, and that might be a little bit farther than my area of expertise. But the idea is recognizing invasive species, right? This can be done all over the world, not just in a kelp forest habitat. Recognizing invasive species, learning as much about it as we can, and learning and taking those steps to minimize it. Let's see. Francis wants to know, do kelp really like sun? Yeah, Francis. So do you have any houseplants or any plants out in your front yard? Well, they need sun, right? They're going to photosynthesize. And kelp, even though it's not a plant, it's an algae, it does the same thing. It takes this energy from the sun and it produces its own energy within its body. Now, some other questions we got are, do kelp get old and die? Yeah, that's, it's a weird concept, right? We think, oh yes, it's going to grow, it's going to be there forever. But giant kelp fronds actually live only about 7 years, and that's if everything's going really well for them, right? But I did mention those threats. I mentioned a lot of things that can impact kelp forest habitats. Now, we are going to be wrapping it up here, but I want to touch on a couple more of those threats, right? Some of them, like I said, that those sea urchins, right? Some are fine. Too many is a problem. The warm water and the sargassum, the invasive species of sargassum. And then also just runoff, pollution from our coastline that gets into the water, right? It can mess up the clarity of the water and disrupt the light that's coming through. It can also cause the nutrients to not be quite as nutritious, and it can cause a lot of issues, right? Pollution in general we know is bad. What else? A lot of different things can go on. Overfishing can actually play a big part in kelp forests and how healthy they are. Overfishing basically means removing fish from the ocean faster than they can reproduce, and that can affect the numbers. As you can see with the sea otter example, sometimes if you remove a species, it can have very drastic effects on the habitat that it is in. And so one thing that we've done to maybe not solve, but address some of these threats is implementing a system of marine protected areas, or an MPA. Okay, so I know we're all cooped up inside right now, but raise your hand if you've ever been to a national park. Okay, raise your hand if you've ever been to a state park. Right, maybe think of your favorite. Raise your hand if you've ever been to a marine protected area, or an MPA. Some of you might have been out snorkeling or walked along the coastline there. Well, an MPA, Marine Protected Area, is a national park or state park, but underwater. Okay, there's different levels of it. It can be like a no-take zone, or it can be a limited take zone, or it can be, a marine reserve. There's lots of different takes on and lots of different levels that an MPA can encompass. But the idea is habitat protection and habitat restoration, if it comes down to it, right? So different ways that we can protect not just that species or that species, right? Or that species or that species, but instead we can protect the entire habitat and allow those animals that call it home the opportunity to grow and thrive. Now, on that, unfortunately, friends, we are running out of time, but I want to thank you all for joining me. I love the questions you were asking. I hope one day soon we all get to go out and explore kelp forests like this. Otherwise, if you are interested, again, that footage of Blue Cavern is always available on our website, as are a number of other webcams and, of course, other programs for you to learn a little bit more about our local oceans here. Now, thanks for joining us. We'll see you back here at 9 o'clock tomorrow morning, and have a wonderful, wonderful rest of your Thursday. Thanks, everyone.